All right, welcome. My name is Eric Prem. I'm actually local here from Vienna, and I'm going to talk about innovation opportunities emerging from leading-edge art, science, technology interaction. I should say the leading edge refers to the technology. I'm not sure about the art. You have to assess for yourself. So this project is actually about the role that art can play in science and innovation processes, and it's something that has been around for many, many years. Actually, you might argue that in ancient times, in the old Greek times, there was a unity of art and science. In poiesis means a process of creation that does not really distinguish between artistic creation and technical or technological creation. The main difference in those days was between physis, so the physics or the nature, and the technology, but not between different kinds of creative processes as such. And there is a certain rediscovery of this unity. I give you one example here, which you'll also find in the paper, that is the 1990 Palo Alto actions, where they involved researchers actively in, artists actively in the research projects. And that is mostly in order to drive invention at that time, probably not so much innovation. But nowadays we see an increasing interest also in this, let's say, in the involvement of artists in science and technology projects in order to produce innovation. And you see, for example, European Commission programs that actively support artists in technology development projects, which is relatively interesting. And this has also been studied in the innovation literature, mostly in the area of creativity. So here are three examples. There is this famous example of the impact of Minority Report, the film, on research directions. So it was actually, Minority Report was first, and then the researchers decided to develop some of those things. That's one way of impacting. Another is something that's called research creation, which is really more a shared activity between artists involved in research. And thirdly, it's of course involving artists in transdisciplinary or interdisciplinary teams in order to stir the creative processes. What we did is we studied the potential contribution of artists in 8 very high-tech technology development projects. Very high-tech means that these are very early stage technology projects, but they do have a technological goal in the end. We called for the participation of artists. More than 250 artists replied to our call. We selected 8, and we teamed them with FET research projects. What are these FET research projects? They are, as I said, leading-edge technology projects, very long-term research, very fundamental, a lot of quantum physics, also a lot of genetics. They aim at radical innovation, and they are very technology-minded. On the other hand, of course, this is also funded by the Commission with the purpose of innovation, and we know innovation is quite the opposite. It's usually very short-term, it's very applied, it's more incremental, and it needs to address a market. So these two things do not really fit together very well, and the question is, can art help to bridge this gap? So what we did is we put these artists in 9-month-long residencies with these research projects. They didn't have to stay there for 9 months. Usually they went there or visited the different labs, because usually these were international projects, and stayed for a couple of days and then moved on. One example that I want to show you is the FET project Subcultron. It's a robotics research project that aims to put a whole, I don't know what you call this, an armada or a school of robots in the Venice Lagoon, and they should stay there and collect data for environmental purposes for weeks or maybe months. In my previous life, I was a roboticist, so this is really, really long-term radical research, because usually robots of that complexity break down after minutes or seconds. So if that works, that's really radical. And it's a range of different robots. The artists went to the lab in Graz and to other labs and visited and talked to the engineers and interacted with them. They were extremely surprised, although they actually are experienced in art-science collaboration, by the level of interdisciplinarity. The artists suddenly realized there were biologists working there, so very interactive, very hands-on ways of working together. And they created a work of art, of which you see a screenshot here. It's called Robots in Distress. What the artists came up with here is, and now of course I am interpreting the work of art, they created something that asks questions about vulnerability. Because the artists realized the engineers had always been talking about robustness, about something that could persist for a very long time. The artists said, no, let's not do that. Let's pose the question, how can we make robots more vulnerable to the environment? And they came up with these simulated robots that move around basically in a pile of trash underwater. So this is one reaction, in this case of Boredom Research, Vicky Isley and Paul Smith, who produced this one example, but they also produced other works of art. Let me give you a second example, and now I'm talking about CRISPR. This is a piece of work, a piece of art created by Anna Dumitriou, who is also the director of the Institute of Unnecessary Research. The work is called Make, Do, and Mend. It's a wartime dress from 1941, which at that time was a controlled commodity, which meant that you couldn't buy it easily during the war. It has stains on it, which actually contain sterilized bacteria. The bacteria are, and now I have to look it up because I don't want to tell you anything wrong here, they are CRISPR-edited E. coli bacteria, which had an ampicillin resistance gene removed from them using CRISPR. So they were originally antibiotic resistant, something that happened but shouldn't have happened really, we know, which is due to the overuse of antibiotics. And Anna Dumitriou in this work repaired this bacteria and put it on the dress used in 1994 as a controlled commodity, whereas really probably the antibiotics should have been the controlled commodity. Okay, let me stop here. This of course, the interpretation of this can go on for a very long time. It's very interesting. I just show you some other results. So these are what other artists have produced. Semiconductor, Ruth Jarman worked with the quantum technology project. Evelina Domnich and Dimitri Gelfand with another quantum technology project, a supercomputing project here in your lower right, Spela Petric and Miha Tursic. And this is a work of art by Pina Yoldas with a chemistry project, basically trying to capture CO2 emissions in a diamond, which I think in itself is like an art project. But what are the results when we try to interpret what has happened in these interactions? And how much does that contribute to innovation? I think that's the question here. So one thing we see is there is a longer collaboration being established in this interaction. It's not just this one project. Actually, these interactions, they tend to go on even when the project is finished, because there is so much energy, so much trust also built into these relationships that they tend to continue even without funding, for example, for a very long period. We found that artists, scientists, and engineers, they develop a joint understanding of the challenges. Of course, they work with different means, but they have the feeling they work towards the same goal, even if they are actually doing something very different. In terms of creativity, that's probably what you would expect. There is a routine-breaking nature of the artists coming into the teams. The artists themselves become early adopters of the technologies. They try out the technologies, and they deliver ideas to the scientists that probably would have never occurred to the scientists as such. An important aspect from a PR perspective is that, and actually I have to say when I designed the project, I was completely unaware of that, but it's actually quite obvious. The works of art in many cases are material objects, which means, first of all, they will stick around for quite some time. You can bring them from one exhibition to the next one, which is very nice for PR. And people develop a special relationship. Elderly people immediately react to the wartime dress. This is not science communication as you may have seen it, because there's no science explained. This is very different. This is an emotional attitude that you create, and it's sustainable, it addresses varying communities, and it really helps to expand the networks. If you want to do this, in the paper you'll find a set of recommendations. I will skip them probably here. Maybe I pick out just one. These projects need some logistic and curating support. So you need something like a curator because you're dealing with art and you want it to go to interesting places. So that's one recommendation that I would have. But probably more importantly, to answer the question, should artists be involved in scientific projects for innovation? I think if you want to do this, you have to be aware that you're asking artists. They are not designers. This is not your contracting innovation. You're actually creating, in a poetic processes, critical reflection. Critical reflection even on the very basic assumptions of what the scientists are doing. And they end up with works of art. So that may not be innovation, but it's probably going in the right direction, namely in creating something that answers very original questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So now, first of all,